Good morning. My name is Kelly Kennedy, and I'm the Next Gen Director here at CBS. And if you brought a child with you today, we want to welcome you and thank you for bringing your little one with you today at CBS. This year, we have about 150 kids registered on our roll. It's amazing, it really is. And we have 17 on a wait list, but we are very hopeful that we will quickly get them added. I made a little sachet around right before I came up here, and I'm proud to admit there are no criers in the building. In fact, they are incredibly quiet and orderly, like they've been at CBS for about 3 months. So I don't know what's up, I don't know what those teachers are doing, but it's good, and I'm very appreciative. About 30 years ago, I came to CBS and I brought my 2-year-old, and I was amazed at the program and how the teachers just loved on him. They prayed for him. And now, fast forward, I'm getting to witness that. Several years ago, I had a 2-year-old grandson that was in the program. And this year, I'm thrilled to say that I have 4 grandchildren in the program. So I'm invested. If I wasn't invested before, it's just such an incredible blessing for me to see all those kids back there learning about Jesus and being loved on and prayed for by all the amazing teachers. CBS really thinks that their children's program is important, and they put a lot of effort into it. And so we have 2 parts of our program. One is a preschool early elementary part, and it goes from birth until 1st grade. And the first semester, they learn Old Testament stories, and then they introduce Jesus right about Christmas time, which works out nicely. They have a corresponding craft, a Bible memory verse that is put to song that they will memorize, and they have an aim that the teacher helps them apply to their lives. Then in the 2nd semester, they begin the New Testament, and they will start learning New Testament Bible stories. We have a Christmas program at Christmas, and we have an end-of-school program there at the end of the year, and I'll be giving you more information on that, but it's always a lot of fun. The second part of the program is our Next Gen program, and that begins in 2nd grade, and it goes all the way to seniors in high school. And the Next Gen program, the curriculum is the same as what we're studying. So all of our kids that are 2nd grade to 12th grade are also studying Matthew this year. And it's written age appropriate, and we have a primary group, a junior group, a middle school group, and a high school group. Our middle schoolers and our high schoolers also will join you here in lecture. I believe our middle schoolers are here right now, so welcome, guys. Our teens will be coming in a little bit. They also have a ministry here to all of us because they put all the chairs up. They set them up and they put them down. And I cannot tell you the ministry that is to all of us in leadership. And Mary, their teacher, is the one that spearheads that. So if y'all see Mary, give her a hug, and the teens too. We really appreciate that. The Next Gen believers, you may wonder if you're new to CBS, you may wonder how are they here this time of day, and it's because they're homeschooled. And if you haven't met me, you may not know that I also was a homeschool mom, and I homeschooled all 4 of my kids for 23 years, and I just want to commend you moms for having your kids here. The curriculum is so amazing. If you have a high schooler and you're working on their transcript, then make CBS put that as a credit for Bible study on their transcript because it counts. Also, that we have 24 women that are serving our ministry back there. 24 amazing women. They have been praying for your children for several weeks individually and by name. And I just want you to know that your kids are known, They are prayed for, they are loved, they are cared for, and they're going to learn amazing things this year. And if it sounds like we're having too much fun back there, don't worry, because you're going to have an opportunity to be back there too. And I'm going to talk to you about that next week when I talk about Love Ladies. But I just want to welcome you, and I want to thank you for sharing your kids with us and entrusting them, because it's going to be an amazing blessing. Thanks.
I thought that was so beautiful that CBS provided that for us. I'm so excited to study the Gospel of Matthew. And remember, it's the good news of Matthew. It's good news. And I thought about wedding cake. It doesn't take much to make me think about wedding cakes, but did you go to any weddings this year? I did in the summer. And it reminded me of the wedding cake that I had a long, long time ago, which my mother-in-law baked and decorated. She was really an artist, and she was a great baker, a great cake maker, and it was so delicious. But you know, the bride and the groom usually don't taste the wedding cake. They're too busy greeting people, dancing, singing, jumping up and down, and the I do's are somewhere in there too. But the wedding cake often is left to be collected by the mother of the bride and put into the freezer. And my mother did that for me and put it in the freezer. She froze everything, even my sister's dead dog, until my sister could come home for the funeral. But the wedding cake was in there too, and she'd wrapped it well. And a year later, we had our first anniversary, and the church that we were attending then, we had a party for our first anniversary, and we brought the wedding cake out of the freezer. And it didn't have dog hair on it or anything, but it had a little freezer burn. But I thought it was delicious, and it still, the icing still melted in your mouth. And that, I'm going to Matthew from this because Revelation 10 says, Jesus says to John, eat this book. Eat this book. And I don't want you to read this book. I want you to eat this book. I want you to read it. Read your passage next week with all those strange names. Just exchange names for, Bennett and Sheffer or something, some other name that you can make them up. These were family lines. Read it out loud so you can hear it, so you can see it. Stand up when you read it. This is kind of asking a lot. You might be too sleepy, but if you stand up and read it out loud, the passage that you're studying, you will more easily, your ears will eat it, and you will get it in your heart. You will get it in your bloodstream. By next May, you will have metabolized Matthew, and he will be part of your bones. He will be part of your blood. He will be part of your nervous system. Matthew is transformative because it's about Jesus Christ. The whole Bible points toward this book. This is the beginning of the gospel. This is the beginning of the good news. And Matthew is first for a reason. It is the most famous book probably of all the Gospels. Most people memorize from Matthew. Most people have read Matthew. It has more details than some of the other ones. Mark is kind of like our culture today. It's fast. Go, 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 go. Do this, do that. And Luke is more scientific, compassionate, because he was a doctor. And John, what can we say? It's just love dripping from every page. But Matthew is a tax collector, and He's logical, and he's a storyteller, and he tells the story not exactly chronologically, because Jesus lived a long time, maybe 30 years or more, before he started acting as the Messiah that he was. But he tells those 3 years of Jesus' life, from the beginning of his ministry to his death and resurrection. He tells those in order. And that's the good news. Jesus is the good news, and Jesus transforms our life. I just want you to think about eating the book. And to me that means maybe, and maybe to you too, maybe reading slower, maybe taking less in it at a time, not something to do to check, but just lean back after you've read from deportation to Babylon to the Christ, 14 generations. Lean back and think about that. What does that mean? It's not part of our culture, but it was part of theirs. It made sense to them. And I think we need to meditate on it. We need to chew on it. We need to read it more slowly. Some of you, and I'm one of them, I listen to Matthew on my earbuds. And that helps, because if you do it over and over, it slows down in your head and you begin to recognize some things. A French archaeologist said Matthew is the most important book in history. The most important book in history. And we get to spend 30 weeks studying the most important book in history, about the most important person ever born into this world. Matthew begins with history, and it doesn't begin with Jesus just being born. It begins with a long story of families, 14 generations, 14 generations, 14 generations. And I think we need to think about that. Why? Usually we skip over these first, we don't want to try to pronounce the names, but if you're by yourself and if you're reading it, even yelling it, it's amazing how these Rehoboam and Abijah and Asaph and Jehoshaphat, I love Jehoshaphat. I think that's a fun name. What if you just shouted it in your closet or outdoors? I've been sitting outdoors by a tree in the mornings, and I can shout out there and nobody hears me. I can sing out there and nobody cares if I'm off key. So think about chewing, eating slowly, like you would a piece of delectable wedding cake that had no freeze or burn, but was just fresh from the oven. You want to treasure each morsel of it, because it's going to become part of you. Matthew I just want to point out just a few little things that you can watch for when you're reading Matthew through the whole year. It has the most Old Testament references. So if you want to put an O in the margin when you see something from the Old Testament, right in the first 2 chapters, there are several references to prophecies that Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming. The Savior of the world is coming. One of them is in Zechariah. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. These things happened hundreds of years before it happened, before Jesus was born. They were prophetic. God knew. God just didn't think, oh, I have a good idea. I'll send my only son to save the world. He had been, since the garden, he's been planning this. So he worked slowly. There was a 400-year period between Malachi and Matthew that nothing was written. And I've heard a preacher say this was the silence of God to get their attention. But a lot of things happened. Bad things happened. The Maccabees, the wars, the Roman takeover of Israel happened in these 400 years. And they had a lot of reason to think God has forgotten us. And I think there are a lot, in war, in death, there are a lot of opportunities to say, God is not here. God is not present. But read Matthew. Read Matthew 1 this week. Read Matthew 2. God is present. God is coming. He is on his way. He is nearby. He is very near. So watch for the Old Testament passages and keep listening to the Old Testament, because this is a long story. It's an eternal story. It keeps going. And then watch for the king. There's a lot about the king, which I think is this in sign language, a K. You can put a K on in your margin when you see anything about the kingdom or the king, because Jesus is called the king in Matthew 3 times more than he is in Mark. In Matthew 2:2, he is born the King of the Jews. The wise men said, "Where is the King of the Jews?" In Matthew 4:17, the kingdom of God is at hand. That's what Jesus says. Kings are worthy of respect and honor and listening to. And I think in Matthew, we need to listen. We need to know the king is here. We need to read slowly. Life in the kingdom, one commentator says, is about relationships, and it's eternal. Matthew is about relationships with the disciples, with the believers. So this book has a lot to do with your relationship with Jesus. Don't forget that. And then C for church. Matthew is the only gospel that mentions the word church. And it mentions the word church in the light of Gentiles, in the light of outsiders, including outsiders. Matthew shows the goodness of Jesus, the kingship of Jesus. The prophetic verses are all for the kingdom, are all for everyone, the Gentiles too, women too. Watch for women in Matthew. The poor too, the unclean too. And there are 4 women, Gentile women in the genealogy on these first few verses, so watch for that. And then God the Father is another one. You can put a G, is 23 times in Matthew. Watch for God the Father. 15 of these are not found in the other Gospels, so it's unusual when you see God the Father. That's what Jesus called him, God the Father. And that's a very unusual thought, that the holy God is our Father. And then Emmanuel, the last one, Emmanuel. Put an I in your margin when you run into Emmanuel. Matthew begins with Emmanuel at his birth in Matthew 1:23. He is God with us. He has come to us. And then it ends with I am with you always in Matthew 28:20. Emmanuel, what a concept for God. There is no other God like this. There is no other God like this, other God than Jesus. The last thing I want to focus on and want you to think about when you're reading is that Matthew, the writer, is a little bit mysterious, but he is an outsider. The most important book in the world is written by an outsider who was unclean because he collaborated with the Romans. The Romans had taken over in 63 BC, and they were exacting taxes. That's what rulers do, who do not appreciate the humanity of the people. That's what God through Samuel told Saul. This is what a king's going to do. He's going to take all your money. He's going to take all your wives. He's going to take all of your work. And that's what happens with rulers. But I think in Matthew collaborated with the enemy. He was working for the Roman government. He was practical. He was going to survive. He was going to have enough to eat, and his family was going to be well thought of. So he said, okay, I will be despised by my brothers and sisters of the Old Testament, but because I just want to live. I want to live a normal life. So he had a booth probably by the city gate, and that's where the tax collectors collected taxes when people would come in. Every worker had to pay a certain amount just for his existence, and farmers had to pay a certain percentage. And the tax collectors made their living by upping the percent, so they kept the extra and gave what Rome demanded. So Matthew was dealing with money all the time. And he was an outsider from his own religion. And he wrote the most important book in the world. He was chosen. He was chosen, if you look in Matthew 9, this is so amazing. My time's up, I'm done. But except for this part. Jesus came and found Matthew. And I want you to think Jesus is coming and finding you in Matthew. He's coming to where you are. He went to the tax booth that Matthew ran and said, surely he said other things. Surely Matthew had met him at night. Surely he'd been in some meeting. Surely he had a co-worker that knew about Jesus and the promises of God. But as far as we know, Jesus was so magnetic that his looking at Matthew, his coming to find him, he said, follow me. Matthew immediately got up and followed him. Immediately. How is that? But you know what else he did? He had a party. Matthew had a wedding cake. He had cake. He had dinner. He had wine. He was wealthy enough that he could invite a lot of other tax collectors and sinners, which means anybody, which means all of us, to his house for dinner to celebrate leaving his business completely and following Jesus, going where Jesus was going to go. Hard things ahead. And they were celebrating. They were having joy. Later on in Matthew, Jesus' enemies said, you drink with drunkards and wine bibbers, you eat with sinners, you're eating and drinking, you're a glutton and a drunkard. And Jesus, I think, would say to them, like he said to John the Baptist, blessed is the one who is not offended by me. Jesus brings joy. When he calls you and says, follow me, then you can have a party and you can invite all your friends and you can say, this is the best thing. I don't know what it is, but I'm following this man. I'm following this man. That's what Matthew did. Matthew followed Jesus to the end of his life. And he wrote this book from that point of view. So I don't want to just think about Matthew as a button-down person who had no personality. He had personality. He had a big party. He invited Jesus to it. He got up and followed Jesus, and he has a story to tell, and we're going to read it. Lord, help us this year to eat your book, to metabolize your book, to follow you in your life. We want to follow. We want to be real. We want to make the choice. You've chosen us. We choose you. In your name, amen.